Welcome back to Axis of Truth on JNS. I'm Emily Schrader, and boy, do we have a lot to unpack this week. Above all, of course, there's the return of our living hostages, which just happened, along with the ceasefire in Gaza. But there's also more. There's protests against peace. Yes, against, that we've seen from the anti-Israel movement across the world, as well as social media. I was actually on the ground in London for some of these festive events, so we'll take a look at that today. We will also see Gaza already descending into chaos as the IDF has withdrawn from certain positions, and questions about phase 2 of the deal, given Hamas thus far is pledging not to disarm. We also sit down with the amazing Dave Rubin to discuss what on earth is going on the right in America following Trump's visit to the region. All of this now on Axis of Truth. Well, first things first, I want to talk for a minute about the pro-war protests, which we've seen pop up following the announcement of the ceasefire in Gaza, particularly in London. Now, during the holidays, I had a chance to visit London, where there was, of course, a terrible anti-Semitic terror attack in Manchester at a synagogue on Yom Kippur. But because that wasn't enough for the anti-Israel mob, they also planned protest on October 7th as well, despite the fact that Israel didn't launch the operation into Gaza after those attacks until October 27th. It's almost like they're protesting for more dead Jews or something. Who would have thought? Anyway, I was proud to stand at these protests with an Israeli flag and call out some of this shameful hypocrisy. But even after I left the UK, this is what they organized. Post-ceasefire, once again proving beyond any doubt that this movement is not about Palestinians in Gaza or calling for a ceasefire. It's about destroying the Jewish state. Kind of an odd move if you think there's a genocide and ethnic cleansing being committed against Palestinians, no? So at the recent London protest, they chanted, of course, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, a statement which necessitates the destruction of the state of Israel. They also chanted death to the IDF and explicitly called for intifada. They held signs calling for the end of Zionism, the movement for self-determination of the Jewish people, and walked around with signs stating intifada until victory with a red triangle, referencing Hamas's red triangles that they used to denote the next targets of their terrorism in propaganda. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has faced a lot of criticism from the West about a statement that there will never be a Palestinian state. But don't you think it's kind of odd how the entire Free Palestine movement is explicitly against two states and always has been, but nobody ever bothers to report or speak about it? For 75 years, the Palestinians have rejected two states, not Israel. Even President Clinton spoke about it. At every single historic opportunity, from the partition plan to multiple peace offers, the Palestinians, not Israelis, have rejected a state for themselves. Now you see the movement doing the exact same thing today, and they're not even ashamed. Indeed, since this ceasefire was announced, instead of being happy that there's an end to the conflict in Gaza, the anti-Israel voices are unhappy that they lost a war they started. Now there's been bizarre silence and in some cases anti-peace statements explicitly from the whole ceasefire now crowd, which was so passionately demanding an end to the hostilities for the past 2 years. I mean, does it get more vile than this? But what bothers me even more than this terror-supporting mob that we've seen in multiple countries is the way that in the UK, the government has responded. The UK government has failed the Jewish community completely. Even Germany and Italy canceled these hate marches. Yet police and ministers in the UK urged cancellation of these marches, yet still permitted them at a time when Jew hatred in the UK is astronomical, when Jews are getting murdered inside synagogues on holidays. And even worse, the Met Police arrested several pro-Israel activists for counter-protesting. Once again, two-tier policing rears its ugly head. The sad part is this hatred will not go away until the government steps up to stop it. And that leads us to our next story today. As the IDF began implementing the first phase of the ceasefire and has already withdrawn from several areas in Gaza, the world saw something that should surprise No one. Hamas turning its guns back on its own people. Reports and footage emerging from Gaza have shown Hamas executing and torturing Palestinians in the streets. Men accused of collaborating with Israel, without trial, of course, being dragged out of their homes. In one video verified by local sources, Hamas fighters can be seen beating a man with the butt of their rifles before shooting him in front of a large crowd. Now, under this peace plan, Hamas is supposed to disarm and, of course, be removed from governance in future stages of this deal. It's something that they've explicitly pledged not to do as late as a few days ago. Now, we saw Hamas already playing games, refusing to return the bodies of the deceased hostages on time, which is of course, a massive violation of the ceasefire. We also saw several Gazans killed by the IDF Tuesday after they refused to heed warnings and approach the area of the IDF. This is another ceasefire violation by Palestinians. But the silver lining here is that Israel is obligated to hold the ceasefire only so long as Hamas complies. This was explicitly stated in the document signed. But does anyone seriously believe that Hamas, a terror organization that murders its own people, will ever lay down its weapons? I mean, even now they're fighting to retain control of a ruined Gaza through fear and violence. Meanwhile, Israeli troops have begun pulling out of parts of the Strip and does plan to withdraw by mid-November, according to the most recent estimates. But Gaza civilians are already returning to their homes in northern Gaza and elsewhere throughout the Strip. Families are walking back to rebuild their lives. This is hardly what you would expect if Israel were indeed ethnically cleansing or committing genocide, as the Hamas propaganda has claimed for months. Yet the international community and these so-called Free Palestine activists have been completely silent on these executions of Palestinians. Their outrage seems to disappear when murderers are Hamas and not the state of Israel fighting a defensive war. Almost like it was never about the Palestinian people at all. Well, this next story is truly outrageous and shows just how far the left-wing Israeli newspaper Haaretz will go to smear Israel, even if it means endangering innocent Iranian dissidents inside Iran. This past week, the Islamic Republic State Propaganda Network, IRIB, aired a forced confession of a political prisoner, Amr Hossein Mousavi. Now, he was shown on camera admitting to working with Israel to restore monarchy in Iran and, of course, promote Israel. This is a complete fabrication. Human rights groups, as well as mutual friends that I have with him, confirmed that he'd been arrested months before the Iran-Israel war even began and that his confession was obtained under severe torture. This is classic Islamic Republic psyops. They torture dissidents, then parade them on TV to spread fear with false confessions that in this case couldn't possibly be true. However, the most disgusting part here is that it was Haaretz which actually gave the Islamic Republic credibility for this lie. Because in a recent article they published, they claimed that there was an Israeli campaign to restore the monarchy in Iran, linking it to Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi and to some so-called pro-regime change social media accounts. Except their own evidence in Haaretz, the documents that they cited, don't say that. They refer to an analysis of artificially amplified content during the war, possibly from a small bot network that relates to Israel and Iran. Nothing about an Israeli government directive to promote Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. Nothing about Israel seeking to restore the monarchy. Even more outrageous when you consider the fact that the Crown Prince himself has spoken out his entire career in favor of democracy. In their desperation to smear Israel's current government, Haaretz turned a technical report into a conspiracy theory about foreign interference. And that distortion was then picked up by Iranian state media, the same IRIB that tortured Mousavi and used to justify his so-called confession. Now he could face execution. Let that sink in. An Israeli newspaper handed the Islamic Republic propaganda ammunition against an Iranian dissident. It's not journalism. It's collaboration with tyranny. And frankly, Haaretz has blood on its hands. Well, the next story I have for you is honestly one of the most disturbing political trends that we're seeing right now. It's not news that some prominent right-wing figures in America have completely turned on Israel and are now parroting the same anti-America and anti-Israel rhetoric that we hear from the far left and even from known Islamists. The horseshoe theory is in full swing, and it is absolutely unhinged. Let's start with Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's been pushing anti Semitic dog whistles and conspiracies all over social media for many years. Now, she's most known for her outlandish Jewish space lasers comment, and also being the candidate for perhaps the dumbest member of U.S. Congress. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, she spent months spreading conspiracies about the Israeli government and Jews, while at the same time ignoring completely the role of Qatar, which has poured billions into American academic institutions. She's also falsely accused Israel of killing Christians while being silent on the slaughter of Christians by Islamists all around the world. She's also perpetuating a debunked conspiracy that Jewish Americans are being paid $7,000 for pro-Israel posts, even trying to demand American Jews register as foreign agents. Sadly, she's not alone on this new woke right. Matt Gaetz has also spent weeks spreading disproved anti-Semitic conspiracies across social media for clicks. Gaetz also previously claimed that Israel is trying to drag America into endless wars, despite the fact that the war with Iran ended in 12 days, without World War III, as he and folks like Tucker Carlson predicted. Truthfully, he sounds a lot more like Press TV than an elected American. And let's not forget that Gaetz himself has been engulfed in scandals over allegations of payments to escorts and underage girls, including reports that he spent more than $90,000 on women that he met through associates. The Justice Department did investigate him for possible sex trafficking, but in the end declined to file charges. Yet this is the man now lecturing Israel on morality? Then there's, of course, Tucker Carlson, who's spent months platforming every Islamist and Iranian propagandist he can find while attacking Israel as some kind of globalist project. The craziest part of all of this, however, is that the far-left trolls like Cenk Uygur or Anna Kasparian are mirroring the rhetoric of lunatics like Candace Owens, and even Islamists like Mehdi Hassan are cheering them on. Well, our guest this week is the host of the Rubin Report, Dave Rubin, whom I've long been a fan of. Now, Dave has spoken about the recent challenges that we've seen on the American right when it comes to Israel and beyond. And today we're going to speak with him about the ceasefire in Gaza and some of these reactions that we've seen from the right. Dave, thanks so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on. I want to start by getting your take to the responses we've seen so far from both anti-Israel activists and those on the right to the ceasefire. There's been a whole lot of silence and in some cases flat rejection of the ceasefire, which, as I said earlier, is a little weird for people who are clamoring for a ceasefire and declaring a supposed genocide, no?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the reaction has been the lack of reaction. As of us taping this right now, I have seen no tweets from Bernie Sanders, no tweets from AOC, nothing from Rashida, nothing even from Chuck Schumer. I did see that Ilhan Omar managed to croak out one thing where, of course, she then also accused Israel of genocide. But, look, this is a really, really interesting moment that I think transcends politics and culture. Like, this kind of captures everything. If you are on the pro-Israel side of this thing, obviously you should be elated. The hostages are coming home. The remains of the hostages are coming home. The war, at least this phase of the war, will wrap up. Israel has lost over 900 soldiers during this. This is largely, about 25-year-old men who are now gone. So there is so much goodness if you're on the pro-Israel side. And on top of the fact that Israel's external enemies, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iran, have been largely eradicated. And I think it's now just fairly obvious, even for the most kind of anti-Israel jihadist lunatic, whether they are in Congress or somewhere in the Middle East, that you're just not going to defeat Israel militarily. So Israel will be stronger on the other side, and they're getting their people back, which is all they wanted, and that's what could have caused this to have ended, roughly 2 years ago if Hamas would have released hostages. On the other side of it, you're right. If you've been screaming that this is a genocide, Bernie Sanders and all of these people should be dancing in the streets. They should be giving out candy the way that the Gazans gave out candy after October 7th. They should be absolutely thrilled it is finally coming to a close. Their silence really tells you more. I mean, it tells you a couple things. First off, Trump did the work here. They don't want to credit Trump for anything. That's kind of the obvious version. But really, the much more, I would say, perverse version is that they're really not for the Gazans. They are not for the Palestinian cause. What they are for is the destruction of Israel. So they're not happy today. Rashida Tlaib, who says she's Palestinian, whatever that means, she should be out there today. Thank God it is over. Yes, I still dislike Israel, but the quote unquote genocide and nothing. So they're really showing you their cards right now. And, I think the other part of this is even if you don't particularly care about Israel, you may not care about Gaza. If you're, let's just say, anti-war, you should be thrilled today. If you're libertarian anti-war, if you're pro-America, and want America to lead the world, you should be thrilled today. So everyone across the spectrum in America should be very happy with where we are at right now for various political reasons. And the silence of the progressives mixed in with a little of the jihadists, yeah, that shows you the game right there.
Now, one of the more disturbing things that I think we've seen in recent weeks is, of course, the insane support, not for Palestinians, but actually for Hamas globally, especially from Islamists, but also from the hard left and even Gen Z. On October 7th, we saw them organizing all over the world against Israel, even when Israel didn't respond to October 7th until the 27th of October. At what point do we as Americans consider curbing this kind of rhetoric? I mean, should police be banning these type of protests? Is it actually free speech?
Well, look, they're using all of our free speech protections against us. And I want us to have the most liberal interpretation of what the constitutionally protected free speech notions are, right? So I don't want the government running around looking for everybody that says something noxious and coming after them. However, what we have seen, I mean, first off, they do literally call for genocide. That is what river to the sea means. They don't even know what river and what sea, but that is what it means. You probably saw on the anniversary of October 7th, the guy outside of Fox News chanting, saying we should have been stronger on October 7th, and we will do it again. It turns out that he is a student at Harvard. Surprise, surprise. From what I understand, the FBI actually is looking into him. He's they also had Hamas flags out there, not just the Palestinian flag, but the actual Hamas flag. So now you have the flag of a terrorist organization. You're saying we, and you're saying we're going to do it again. That, as far as I can tell, is not constitutionally protected speech. The other part of this is they just turn it on and off whenever they want. As far as I know, you can't just take over 6th Avenue just because you feel like it, unless you're a Palestinian protester. So that's also a problem because at some point it becomes unlivable to live in cities. At any given moment, the city, the main thoroughfare is shut down. Oh, sure, you own a little bodega, you own a shoe store. Sorry, nobody can get there because there are people, basically terrorist supporters out on the streets. So look, you want to be as open and defensive of free speech as possible. There is a difference, though, of course, between free speech and action. And, if we look at what happened at Columbia and a lot of the other universities where they're literally closing the campus, they're not letting Jewish students on board. They quite literally locked 2 Hispanic janitors in a building and overtook the building. Like all of these other things, those are actions, not speech. But as for the specific lines that sometimes they're saying, yeah, this is where we in the West, if you ask the average person in Britain or in France, would they have done things differently 10 or 15 years ago? Most of them would have said yes. So we have to think about what that means very seriously.
Now, you've spoken about the issues in the conservative movement. Obviously, a lot of people on the right are concerned about the kind of bizarre positioning of folks like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. Candace, of course, with the Charlie Kirk assassination conspiracies, Tucker with the repeated dog whistles and, in my opinion, anti-America rhetoric, not just anti-Israel. I mean, I don't know how you can shill for Putin the way that he has even before his very public shift on Israel. But Dave, I mean, you've been in these circles a long time. You know some of these individuals. What's behind the shift?
Yeah, first off, as I get asked this type of question a lot lately, it gives me no pleasure to talk about people that I used to be friends with and that, Tucker blurbed my last book. We've, done each other's shows many times, so Candace and I, we've been to weddings together and all these things. So there's like a personal element that's kind of depressing around it. I would say on the idea side of it, I mean, let's put it this way. Donald Trump is the one that I think can and should put an end to this. Tucker, in no show that he does, ever does anything pro-MAGA or pro-America at this point. So let's put aside Israel and the Jews for a second. Yes, is there a particular obsession with that? And does that connect itself to radical sort of anti-Americanism? And are there reasons, perhaps Qatar funding, that some of that's happening? That's all possible. But I think if you set that aside for a second, what I'm really worried about here is that whatever it is that Tucker seems to be up to me is designed to destroy MAGA. One of the beautiful things of MAGA is that MAGA is the widest tent pro-America movement, certainly in my lifetime. In that, Donald Trump, is he a hardcore conservative? Obviously not. He's kind of a disaffected liberal from New York who understands conservatism, has done great conservative things, let's say with the Supreme Court, reversing Roe v. Wade, that kind of thing. But then at the same point, he is actually a liberal at heart, which is why he's the first-time president to be for gay marriage. Not even Barack Obama was. He then he widened the tent so that a guy who was running as a Democrat 2 years ago, Bobby Kennedy, can now be in his cabinet. Tulsi Gabbard, who was a Democrat only a year and a half ago, is now in his cabinet. Joe Rogan, who's obviously not a conservative, voted for Donald Trump. Elon Musk, not a conservative. Me, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. What I'm trying to do is hold that thing together. And that's why watching what Tucker's done has been so disappointing, because he seems to be trying to drive a wedge in that and trying to destroy the wide tent thing, trying to make sure that only a very certain sliver of the conservative movement, or whatever you want to call it, will fit within a future Republican Party. And I hope that Trump sees that. That's what I would say. I hope that Trump sees that. I don't know exactly what's driving these people. Are they drunk on clicks? Are they drunk on money? Like, there's all of those things. I don't have any specific evidence of that. I mean, you can look at the numbers and ascertain things about money. So there's probably some level of that, but I think that's usually kind of low resolution thinking. I just think, if America is going to survive, if we are going to make sure that we don't become Western Europe, even for all of the good things happening right now that Donald Trump has done with the border and with trade and now with peace in the Middle East and a series of other things, we still have major problems on the horizon. We still will have to deal with a homegrown jihadist threat and a bunch more. So we need a wide tent MAGA movement. And I hope that maybe over the next couple days and weeks, Tucker will realize, boy, I really was just kind of on the wrong side of this thing. Why don't I just put it down for now? Israel is still here. The Jews are still Americans. Just let it be and focus on the positive. My challenge to Tucker, if he's watching the show today, would be do something that is positive for America. That might be interesting, as opposed to just complaining about everything or bringing on people every day who seemingly hate America and hate MAGA.
Now, since October 7th, we've been seeing the horseshoe theory really play out in real time. And again, with people like Cenk Uygur suddenly agreeing with the insane conspiracy theories of people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and more recently, Matt Gaetz also jumping on the conspiracy bandwagon with an almost obsessive focus on AIPAC and Israel, shouting about America first, and yet a total silence on Qatar. I would love to get your take on this. What is America first? And why do we see this battle for the right over really an allied democratic state like Israel?
Right. Well, again, in reality, there shouldn't be a fight here because we should all be on the same side. These people have chosen to drive a wedge through MAGA, again, for reasons that I think it's hard for us to figure out. I'm not in their brains or in their hearts. But what is America first? Look, I am 100% America first. I am an American. I want what's best for America. I believe in Western values. I believe in capitalism. Now, alongside that, at a country, I believe in secure borders. But I believe in the culture of America and the freedom of America and the founding of America and the idea. I know they hate it when you say the idea of America, but America was an idea that all of these people from all over the world could come and share in something that was based in individual rights and a bottom-up view of the world and all of those things. All of that is America first. And then America, well, I think Donald Trump really gets it. America is America first. We're here for Americans. And then we should lead the world. It doesn't mean we have to force everyone to have our beliefs. It doesn't mean we have to nation build and go on some of the military adventures that we've had in the past. But we should find countries that want to share in the American dream, that view the world roughly like we do. And then we can do all sorts of incredible things. And by the way, when Donald Trump went to Saudi Arabia, about 6 months ago and gave that incredible speech, that's exactly what he said. And largely that's what led to this Israel-Hamas deal, because the other countries in the Middle East suddenly were like, boy, America's strong again. They're not saying they're going to bomb the hell out of us, but they are saying if you want to share in our economic success, if you want to get some of the protections that we can offer you militarily, technologically, et cetera, then get on board this. Stop relentlessly hating the Jews, accept that this thing the size of Jersey is going to be there. Get over it, which some of the countries have already done with the Abraham Accords. And then you see what peace causes. It causes flourishing economies and all the rest of it. So there should be no conflict on the right now. Like, there can be ideological conflicts. Okay, I want this tax rate, you want this is what I want for a little foreign aid, this, that. Like, we can do a little bit of that, but this thing where we're all aimed to destroy each other is really, really bad. And again, I really hope that this opportunity right now, that Trump has done something so good, so positive, I hope Tucker and the rest of these guys will be like, you know what? Trump made all this happen. We didn't go to thermonuclear World War III with Iran, which is exactly what Alex Jones and Tucker were saying. It was wrapped up in 12 days, and America basically had to drop 2 bombs. Most of the terror syndicates have been destroyed, like Hezbollah. Like, there's an opportunity now. So maybe let's also take the opportunity and heal some of the divide on the right.
Well, now speaking of the horseshoe theory, let's talk about New York.
Yeah.
How on earth can someone like Mamdani be a serious contender for mayor? I mean, this guy is an Islamist whose delusional economic policies would basically see the collapse of the city if fully implemented. He wants to defund the police, cut counterterrorism funding. What is it going to take for New Yorkers to wake up?
Look, I was born in Brooklyn. I grew up in Long Island. Most of my formative years were in Manhattan. My great-grandparents and grandparents lived in Manhattan, so I was always going there as a kid. And I remember when I was about 11, 12, when Dinkins took over, and he was a democratic socialist at the time, and we stopped going into New York City as much because it was violent and it was not safe. And then my grandparents would come out to the suburbs instead, even though we used to just go to them. And then a guy by the name of Giuliani took over and he cleaned it up. And then they had a great run with him and Bloomberg. And then, of course, they handed it over to de Blasio, who was a socialist, and it turned to crap. And then they handed it to Eric Adams, who pretended to be a moderate, but actually was a socialist, and it continued to go that way. And now they have an affirmed socialist, right? So I'm using socialist like small s. But now they have a guy who's a full-on socialist. Doesn't matter if you call him a socialist or a communist, or yes, is he part Islamist? For sure. Look, you have to give credit where credit is due. These people have taken over the institutions. They've broken young people's brains. They have convinced people that all of the things that all of our forefathers and ancestors fled, whether it was from Eastern Europe or it was from South America or it was from Asia or wherever, they are now trying to basically reincorporate all of the things that our ancestors fled here on the shores of America. So it's very, very sad. I think New York City is going to get bad very quickly. I do think they can fake it for a while. You can make government-run grocery stores kind of work for a little bit, and you can fake the budgets. And also, the Democrats know how to turn on and off the violence, even these protests, so they can shut down the violence for a little while and make it look utopian. And then the question is, does that start scaling across the country, because people will be like, oh my God, it's kind of working. So I am worried about that. But look, this is where we are at in America. It's a sad function of where we are at in 2025, that there are huge swaths of people that think capitalism is bad and communism, socialism is good. And they're going to pay it's the New Yorkers who will pay the price. And by the way, all the New Yorkers who can afford it, who have the means, they're going to get the hell out. They're going to come to Florida and make it even stronger than it is.
Well, the last question before I let you go, Renee. Now, as I'm sure you know, the Qatari state media Al Jazeera has played a terrible role in this conflict we've seen in Gaza. I mean, you've been on the ground here in Israel since October 7th, and you've seen what's happening and how Al Jazeera has really massively misrepresented the situation. But now we're starting to see some reports of Al Jazeera and Qatar changing their tune a little bit. I know a lot of the known anti-Israel execs were actually fired. What do you think is behind this? And do you think that we'll see a major change in the approach of states like Turkey or Qatar towards Israel and towards the West in general?
Yeah, I think you credit Trump and you credit Bibi. It was not easy for them to do that strike in Qatar. And even though they didn't get as many of the top leadership as Hamas they wanted, they put Qatar on notice. Like, guys, we've known you've had these billionaire leaders here. And although we didn't get them, we can get anyone at any point. And I think that sent chills throughout Qatar. Qatar is, as everyone calls it, it's sort of like a glorified gas station. There's not that many native Qataris. They have a huge amount of slave labor there. I mean, there's a really nasty underbelly to a very rich country there. And they have been funding so much of not only Hamas specifically, but they do through Al Jazeera pump insane propaganda across the West. Let's not forget, by the way, that Al Gore, former VP Al Gore, sold his failed TV network, Current TV, to Al Jazeera for $500 million. He refused to sell it to Glenn Beck, which at that time Glenn wanted the Blaze to be on network television. He refused to sell it to Glenn Beck for political purposes. He had no problem selling it to Al Jazeera, which I think Qatar is the #2 exporter of oil in the world. You'd think Al Gore would be against that. But all of that aside, I think they're feeling the pressure now. And I think, again, this is just how great Trump is. He has basically made it clear to these people, you are not going to wipe Israel off the map. It's just not going to happen, you idiots. Like, we're 2 years after this thing. What has happened and the hostages and the catastrophe that happened 2 years ago might have broke half the countries in the world in half. But if anything, Israel's actually stronger now for the reasons that I laid out. Its enemies are way weaker. And I think after going through this for 2 years, like the spirit there's going to be a new generation of leadership there. Bibi's not going to be in charge forever. Like, I think the horizon is so bright. And I think Qatar probably realized, playing both sides of this all the time is just not going to work anymore. Trump sees through it. So I fully credit Trump for all of that.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Dave Rubin, for joining us today and for shedding some light on this situation happening in the United States as well as around the world here in the Middle East.
Next year in Jerusalem.
Well, last but not least, we have our good, bad, and ugly stories of this week. Our good story of the week is the Nobel Peace Prize. No, not for President Trump this time around, but maybe in 2026. The 2025 Nobel Peace Prize went to Maria Corina Machado, the courageous Venezuelan opposition leader who has truly risked her life standing up to Maduro's brutal socialist regime. Now, she's been jailed, barred from office, and actually forced into hiding, where she remains now. Yet she continues to fight for democracy and freedom in a country crippled by corruption and poverty. Some were disappointed that President Trump didn't receive this prize for the hostage deal, but I think it's important to note that the nominations closed back on January 31st, which was actually long before the ceasefire was implemented, even before the Iran-Israel war. So he really couldn't have been eligible this year for that, at least for those achievements. In any case, Machado's win is a win for all who believe in the fight to end Venezuelan socialism once and for all. Plus, she's already being targeted by anti-Israel trolls for being too pro-Israel. You see, if CARE is against her, I think she's actually doing something right. And now our bad story of the week, the NHS in the UK. The NHS doctor who should be saving lives is instead glorifying terror and denying rape on social media. Dr. Rahme Al-Adwan, this is someone I've spoken about before. She's a Palestinian trainee doctor in the UK. She's posted that October 7th was the day Israel was humiliated and justified Hamas's massacre of Israeli civilians. She's repeatedly denied that Hamas raped women and murdered children, calling those reports propaganda. And when called out, she's blamed Jewish supremacy, sounding like a straight-up Nazi. She's continued this for many weeks as she continues to receive criticism over her comments. She's blatantly pro-terror, anti-Semitic, and unbelievably still licensed to practice medicine in the United Kingdom. She was referred to a tribunal once before, which found no risk to patients, literally their words, and was then allowed to keep treating people, something that even the UK's health secretary condemned. Now she's been referred again after more hateful posts surfaced. Frankly, the fact that this is even a debate is insane, because any doctor who celebrates the murder and rape of civilians is a danger to the public. The NHS and the GMC, the body reviewing her license, should have permanently stripped her of her license the first time. No patient, Jewish, Israeli, or otherwise, should have to wonder whether their doctor secretly believes that they're subhuman, as Rahmi so clearly does. A truly disgusting failure of Britain's medical system. And finally, for the ugly story of the week, this week on Piers Morgan, I debated Nasser Mashni, the president of the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network. Let's take a look.
With respect, why should anyone condemn Israel for their response, given that you refused to condemn what Hamas did on October the 7th?
I condemn the killing of innocent civilians.
But you didn't, though. You said the whole thing was rightful resistance.
I said I condemn.
No, you began to equivocate when I took you on.
No, I'm not equivocating.
But then you repeated, to me, it's a rightful act of resistance.
People are allowed to resist their occupiers. It's international law.
Then you're endorsing what happened.
An occupier? An
Respectfully, was Hind Rajab a terrorist? 355
Hind Rajab was never a target.
355 bullets.
There's a difference between a legitimately declared war, which is justified, and civilian casualties in war, and walking into someone's house on a Jewish holiday and kidnapping and murdering children. There is a difference.
Now, in the debate, Nasser also openly declared October 7th was resistance. He called Kfir Bibas, an infant murdered by Hamas, an occupier, as you heard, and even stated that the hostages were bargaining chips. His words. He also rejected the peace agreement, of course, and this is who represents the Free Palestine movement in Australia. A man who also, by the way, has a criminal record for kidnapping and violence, whose own father was praised by Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. His disgusting comments are not slip-ups, they're confessions. He's a propagandist who promotes terror under the guise of human rights. When someone can praise Hamas's massacre as resistance on international TV and still be treated as a legitimate advocate of the movement, that really should tell you everything that you need to know about the Free Palestine movement. Well, that's a wrap for this week on Axis of Truth. I know we had a lot to cover this week, but we'll be back soon with more interviews and more stories from the Middle East. I'm Emily Schrader. Be sure to follow me on social media, Emily K. Schrader or Emily in Tel Aviv. Thanks for watching, and see you next week on Axis of Truth, only on JNS.